All right. So thank you, Daniel, for taking time. I know we've been trying to sit down for a while and just have a conversation. So I'm super excited that both of our schedules were able to align this time, and we can sit down and record together.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for inviting me. I don't know how long ago it was that you invited me, but I felt bad.
Yeah.
Um,
All
I'm
good.
difficult to like pin down. I'm flighty.
Well, yeah, you are a busy person, and I think we'll get into that a little bit here. And let's just start with that. Let's talk about who you are, where you came from. You are an enlisted member in the Air Force, so let's talk about your journey of joining the Air Force and a little bit about your career and what you do for the Air Force now.
Yeah, absolutely. I am an enlisted member, and I actually kind of like shout that from the rooftops. Like any room I enter, I'm like, "Watch out, enlisted guy here," because uh, for honestly, because I have had the unfortunate experience of being the only enlisted person in the room in a lot of
Mm,
cases where I could represent that, that experience, and a lot of officers in the room, I was kind of able to school them on what they might be missing from
yeah.
that bird's eye view. Anyway, so I'm a Chinese linguist by training. I've been in the Air Force for about coming up on 16 years, I think, and I'm a tech sergeant. Um, and yeah, so I did the Chinese linguist thing for a while. Did the Chinese basic course and then the advanced course at DLI, and also did the linguist thing, but also managed to work in the schoolhouse a little bit as an academic training advisor. Yeah, but my journey kind of diverges from that when I got to about well, I've always kind of been scratching at the door to try and do things other than just what I was told to, right?
Right.
Create
Yeah.
space to improve the work I was doing. I say that I've kind of been the innovation type, always just looking for better ways of doing things and questioning the status quo and all of that. Um, and then I talked my way into a position of leading a wing innovation office. Um, by and that's sort of a and this is like my innovation origin story really was that I was trying to solve an Air Force policy issue that was affecting my family, and I went and did a lot of research as part of that campaign. And then before I knew it, I kind of knew more about innovation management than anybody in, my immediate chain of command,
Yeah.
which enabled me to talk my way into this position, stand up a wing innovation office, which got me into facilitated practices and design and innovation strategy, and um, helped stand up the 70th ISR Wings innovation cell, and got an opportunity to fail at a couple of different approaches there, which was super great for my education. Um, and then I went back to the Intel world, and then I was stuck without kind of that safe innovation team environment. And then I needed a support network, so I created one in the form of Agitare, which we can talk about. And then after doing the work with Agitare got me on the radar of some folks at Air Force Cyberworks, and they hired me to do. They offered me an opportunity to do that work full time, which I leapt at because I wasn't eager to stay in the doing the linguist grind. And yeah, so that's where I am now. Air Force Cyberworks at the Air Force Academy in Colorado, and I do facilitation and design and workshops and futures and lots of weird stuff.
I love it. Now you mentioned you kind of got into this space based off like most off of a need, right? A need for you to figure something out that it was affecting you. So was innovation and design and uh, just this type of space always something that you were interested in, and this need pushed you into that direction, or Is it because of you had to deep dive for this thing that was affecting your family that you it opened your eyes to this world?
It was like a perfect storm. I think I have the temperament. Like I'm a big fan of Malcolm Gladwell and Adam Grant both in their writings on innovators talk about disagreeableness
Mm,
being a key ingredient.
yeah.
And I'm that. I just it might be because I'm like you know neurodivergent in some ways, but I'm kind of always socially uncomfortable, like perpetually if I'm especially if I'm in not my like inner circle, if I'm with not my inner circle, I'm uncomfortable anyways, which means that the threshold for me to bring something up as like, hey, what if we didn't do things this way is pretty low for me. Like and I immediately upon arriving at my first duty station, I annoyed the hell out of my leaders because I was like, what the, why are we doing it this way? I just at school was doing it this whole other
Mm,
way. Like and they found it obnoxious because they considered it their jobs, I think, to say what was the right way for us operators to be doing things.
yeah.
um, but it's always been really apparent to me, that the people doing the job are the ones most intimately familiar with one, what right looks like how it feels when it's working, and also when your job is pointless or
Yeah.
dysfunctional. Like there's just a lot you can see from ground level that is invisible when you're sitting behind the management position. So yeah, so it's a combination. I was always um, pushing back against the "don't bring me problems, bring me solutions." I think that's stupid. Like, um, why why would the same people who are good at identifying problems necessarily be the ones who come up with like, you know? So I was already had this temperament, and then I that moment of the policy issue was like my I think Malcolm Gladwell talks about it in David and Goliath. There's a point of nothing left to lose that makes
Yeah.
the underdog, it gives the underdog an advantage because they don't like, they can just pull out all the stops.
Yeah.
Whereas the people in positions of power can't. My managers or leaders, they had a lot to lose, uh, partially why some of them might have been acting as gatekeepers to me solving issues because they had
Yeah.
to protect themselves and they felt like they had to protect the office or protect the commander or whoever. And whereas me, I was like, I don't care who this hurts. It's already hurting my family, and that's unacceptable.
Yeah.
Um, it was just to go into a little more detail, it was an exceptional family member program issue. My daughter was on hospice care at the time. She was in the decline that eventually ended her life last year, or it might have been 2 years now, honestly. um, and or it's been a year and a half now that I think about it.
Yeah.
So um, the so there's this policy issue. My daughter's on hospice, and
Yeah.
I was like, no, I'm not going to be separated from my family for 3 years. It's just basically what they were asking me to do. So I was like, well, I'm going to end my career anyways. Why would I? I'm not going to bother being polite at this point or worry about my rank, like my promotion abilities.
Right.
Nothing Nothing will superpower somebody in the innovation space like no longer caring about promotion. The most activated people in this space are the ones who are like, oh, actually, promotion doesn't matter to me anymore. I just want to do, good things. And so that's kind of what happened to me. I was kind of a fast burner until I hit kind of a point,
Yeah.
and then it was like, oh, actually, I don't care if I make master sergeant. What I care about is not being separated from my dying daughter, and um, and then I managed to do some pretty like I managed to overcome some pretty difficult hurdles as a result of that leveling up. That was my super saiyan moment, right? And so it was a combination. It take it's a yeah, it's a combination of factors.
Yeah, that's a man. That's a lot. But so from that and I don't know, maybe no, I don't know if freedom's the right word to tap into who you were more as a
Yeah.
person to push for what you needed for your family. Um, how has that changed your approach now? Because obviously you're still in.
Yeah, I am. Well, and I'm in because people made the choice to protect me. Like
Yeah,
leaders were like, fixed things. In some cases, it was because like the chief master sergeant of the Air Force heard about what was going on with me because I
yeah,
made it known, and then reached down, and in some cases because my wing commander finally got word, stopped being protected from the details of my situation, and reached out. So I'd say that the leadership kind of protecting me from self-destructing my own situation, because it's the only
yeah,
option available to me, right? Was just, I'm just going to start punching walls and see which ones cave, right? um I won't say that either that I was like some, righteous or did the right things or was always the correct approach. I feel bad for my poor supervision at the time who had to deal with that, because nobody nobody uh should have to navigate the pressures from above and also have to face me down in my righteous rage at the same time. Which is why I think the culture issue is so important, because it was the culture that prevented them from feeling empowered to do that. Um, I forgot what the question was, but I do, I did want to mention what
yeah,
the the role that leadership played in that, um, in kind of creating the channel for oh, it was about me still being in. And I
yeah,
actually, like, yeah, I credit my leadership with me still being in, because I there have been a lot of, you know uh there have been, before they kind of created affordances and gave me the opportunities to do the things I was passionate about. The only reason I was in is because I was trapped,
yeah,
because I needed health insurance. My daughter's care was $300,000 a year, easy, sometimes more, um, which makes being in the military pretty cush. People talk about how much I get paid, and I'm like, yeah. Actually, when you look at the medical bills, I'm making more than like general officers. So, um, the yeah. So now I'm like, uh, it is really reliant for people who aren't trapped. If they don't have those leaders creating affordances for them to generate, like, to do things that feel valuable to them, this is why we have a retention problem, especially for neurodivergent, especially for creative types. Like, we're really good at retaining people for whom these this culture is already a good fit, which might
yeah.
not be the best thing.
No, and I was gonna, yeah, you because I sent you a video a couple weeks ago from Dr. Darling, and this was, I think he made this video in the '80s, and it had to do with organizations in Japan versus America, and how um, he specifically pointed out, and this is why I sent you the video of the um, patriarchal system, which we find in the military, of a top-down structure where it is influenced and based on an annual review where
Mhm.
expectations are established that if you are my supervisor and you give me an annual review and you tell me that I am doing a fantastic job, and then we're in a vacuum of rank up or move out, that if you tell me I'm doing great, well, then my expectation from you is for you to move me up. And as
Yeah,
soon as that, and as soon as you don't move me up, well, now my work performance is degraded, and
yeah,
I'm looking at you. And then what that creates, of course, is this all kinds of chaos and negativity and backstabbing. And I just thought of that as you tell your story, because here we are in a situation where we're not even talking about work performance or even as a necessity to rank up, but the situation is still there where leaders who are supposed to have top cover for the people underneath them still have to live in an environment where what they say, what they do, and how they approach a situation to their superiors still affects their careers when we're talking about how it affects an airman and a
Yeah.
person.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I actually, the competitive versus collaborative dichotomy, like, is a really interesting one to me. And that one kind of came into my head when I was thinking about it was specifically around innovation strategy, because one thing I realized, as you know, the Air Force was investing a lot in the whole spark tank thing,
Yeah.
is that I was realizing that I have very little appetite to participate in competitions like that. I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't want to go compete with other people, and then even if you did tell me that my idea, you know, my apples over here won the contest against all the other fruits, I'm like, I they're different. Like, they're different. They feel the
Yeah.
value is different for different audiences, and those competitions often are rating things from a single perspective. How much money does it save Big Air Force, for
Yeah.
example? And I've always been pretty adamant that innovation, one of the powers of innovation, is to put to empower practitioners to improve their own lives, um, which bubbles up to an environment in which we actually have the capacity and the affordance and the psychological safety to solve bigger operational problems, right?
Yeah.
But an environment that doesn't allow for the celebration and opportunity and resourcing of just my life sucks and we could make it easier with this really simple thing. An environment that doesn't facilitate that does not facilitate operational innovation. Like, that's been my thesis for a while. And so I was thinking about, what is this thing I don't why don't I care about Spark Tank? It's the biggest, most, you know, the most advertised Air Force. This is Air Force innovation, and I realized that it's all about two things: competition and privilege. Like, and the so I'm a musician. Like, I'm also a creative. Like, that's one thing. I write and I make music, and this is something I've been exploring a lot recently. Is the the collaborative act with other musicians is often completely devoid of competition. When I get together with a bunch of other musicians and I'm like, it's also super safe. I would often share stuff that I'm like, straight up, this is garbage. Like, I made this complete garbage. What, what, listen to it, see what, you know, what do you want to do with it? And then they would go, oh, I would take it in this other direction. They'd turn it into something really interesting. So I think that I approach this from a collaborative mindset. And I see, if we were to insert a competitive kind of ethos into that, it would damage it. It
Yeah.
would it would be like a virus. So when I see our whole thing be a market for the down selection of what's important to Big Air Force, creating a one cells that are privileged, you know, like, if you are good enough in Big Air Force's eyes, then you get to be one of the privileged ones working in a cell like AFWorks, or like I do
Yeah.
now at Air Force CyberWorks. I feel very privileged, you know, or working in one of the labs or something. It's a place where you are set apart, and you get, you know, people like praise you, and it's, you know, making big difference. And, you know, I'm experiencing it right now, honestly.
Yeah.
Um, but I can't help but think, just because this is happening in these cells, or the people winning the contest for innovation, does that affect the larger culture or accessibility or empowerment or equipping the larger force? Often it doesn't. Actually, often it does this thing where moral licensing is kind of the psychological term for when you do something that feels really good so that you don't have to do something that's much harder and lasts much longer and affects more people. So I see like labs and competitions as actually like at, you know, because they're, by their very nature, they're privileged and they're competitive. They actually prevent you from doing the hard work of putting this in the hands of everybody who needs it. I know that was a lot. Sorry.
No, that was great. Two things that kind of came to my mind as you were talking about that. So, um, in your position now, when you go facilitate and you talk design and innovation and change, how do you create that space to acknowledge those types of silos and create the culture to where innovation isn't just a competition, but innovation is meant for real change?
Yeah. So one thing that I actually really appreciate about working at Air Force SciWorks is that part of our portfolio is putting these tools in the hands of whoever, like across the Air Force. And we've done a few cool projects that involved that, where it wasn't a here, fine, you have a problem, we're going to take it, we're going to fix your problem for you
Right.
because we're the ones who know how to do this. It was a co-creative, which is more like, ideally, if you're solving a problem for people who you are not, co-creation is an ideal approach, including them in the process. But then a step further than that, a number of our projects have been to do the sort of talk about what we're doing as we're doing it, so that people could repeat the process themselves. We're trying
Yeah.
really hard to make it educational. You know, we've done this for a few, and we want to activate people and give them these tools so that they don't have to rely on us in the future. Like, ideally, well, we are very well equipped to solve problems for the Air Force and for ACC, who kind of owns us. Um, we're ideally suited to take things into our portfolio that are like, the personnel recovery software suite, or these things we can do UX design on, or we can do some thorough problem solving on. We are also interested in working our way out of a job by putting these tools in the hands of more practitioners, which it is the ideal approach in my eyes. It's
Yeah.
one that is, I say that I'm privileged, and the privilege necessarily prevents more people from having access. But I think that's what you have to do, is you have to, from those places of privilege, from those places of opportunity, how do we create channels so that more people can work their way into this space? Or how do we lower the threshold of entry? Um, and another thing that I do is, for every one of one of the things that we do really well is, like, now I mentioned being enlisted. Now I'm of the mindset that if we enter into a collaboration and I look around and I see the lack of all the kinds of diversity that we need in that effort, and that includes like, people talk about cognitive diversity like it's the only one. Cognitive diversity is important, but having representation from other demographic factors, for me, the enlisted officer divide is a particular point of, I've had that experience a lot. But that's one thing that I do, is I'm like, who is in this room? Who's included? Who are we empowering to actually have a say in
Yeah.
what this results in? Like, we've seen the women's initiatives team is doing a great job of exposing what
Killing it.
happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you just don't include women in the conversation, for decades and decades, you end up with like, their uniforms were actually just slightly modified from men's uniforms, right? Stuff like that. So I think that anytime you're in a position of privilege like that, or a position of authority, or you're shaping the
Mm-hmm.
future, you have a far more responsibility there to make sure that your efforts are inclusive. So that's one way of going about that.
Absolutely. The thing that I love that you mentioned there is equipping the tools to take yourself out of a job.
Yeah.
I think that's a benchmark for all leaders. The whole point is to pass on everything that you know, regardless of position. I've spent most of my career at a base level, and my job is to teach the people under me everything that I know so they can take that and then use it to their advantage, which most of them do because they're not going to do it like I did, and nor would I want them to. My only goal, of course, is to not be a helicopter supervisor over them all the time, but to say, here's things that I failed at that you can watch out for already and go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one reason I was really excited to see Mission Command make its way into Air Force doctrine this last year. Is because I've been kind of like complexity and leadership and complexity and team of teams and those kinds of topics have been central to how I explore the space of design facilitation and so I encountered Mission Command through that, and I think that's exactly what you're describing is how do you push down that decision space? How do you push down
Yeah,
that autonomy to lower levels? Because then it allows those at the higher levels to worry more about what should the intent be, right? Because that should be their
right.
primary question. If they're busy worrying about tactical matters,
Yeah,
then they're not spending enough time really reflecting on what is our strategy right now. And I think
yeah,
that might account for some of the failures that we've seen like across a number of domains.
yeah, totally. When you're doing your facilitation, do you also approach it in a way to where you want to communicate? I'll call it acceptable failure, is because just something that I've used in the past at my level, at least teaching airmen and younger NCOs, non-commissioned officers, how to lead and how to run a shift, how to run an operation of a little tactical level. I think it's so easy, and now that I've gone up in rank, and like you work with more senior NCOs and officers, the mindset of never fail or to scrub a listing to make it look better than what it is so prevalent that I fear we can't teach correctly unless we, like you had said, open a space to where failure on a tactical level has got to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so uh, I've written a little bit on failure. I think that if you're navigating complexity, um, and this is like we were talking about Kinevin a little bit before this. I'm not going to go into Kinevin because it's there are domains within which you can tell the future, right? There are
Yeah,
ordered
yeah,
systems, they're contained. It's like I know the future in the context of my calculator. I know that if I push 2 plus 2, that's how I end up, that's how I add those two numbers together. I know that.
absolutely.
And so, therefore, if I gave somebody an addition problem and they chose not to use that best practice of the first number plus the second number, that would be an unacceptable failure because there's never going to be a situation in which you were supposed to use the minus button for an addition problem, right? So,
Right.
but if calculators were complex, that might be the case. If it was a complex system, then we'd have to go. We are trying to find out what 2 plus 2 is, but maybe this time we're going to have to do, equals sign 2, and that's how we're going to do it this time. And I think people fail to realize that that's actually what complexity is like. You can't go into a complex scenario and know for sure what actions are going to result in success.
Yeah,
And because of that, the right approach is open to failure. It creates an opportunity for failure. And it also, you are aware of what failure looks like before going into it, right? You've kind of decided we're trying to we're trying to create this effect. And if we do this thing and we don't get that effect, that was failure. Unfortunately, we kind of pretend complex scenarios are ordered ones, and we go, uh, and we create measures of effectiveness that are, did you do the steps I said? Which is a way of, right?
yeah,
It's
yeah, yeah,
it's like we said the steps. Therefore, if you did the steps, That's success or failure, whether you did the steps or not. That's treating a
Right.
complex situation like an ordered one. And so this like opening yourself up to it happens a lot in facilitation because it's such a dynamic environment. You're basically you're trying to create an affordance for something emergent to happen. You're trying to create conditions for something that you can't really know for sure what the outputs are going to be. And because you don't know what the outputs are going to be, some of the time, plenty of the time, the outputs are going to be like, whoa, what do we do with that? Right? Which then, sometimes you're like, whoa, those are terrible outputs. And being able to say that is what happened is really, really important.
Yeah.
And I wrote a whole essay on this recently because in addition to creating opportunities for failure, not just like being open to failure, but actively courting opportunities for failure. Like,
Right.
it's kind of like, I don't know, anybody who's innovating in a sport, right? If you're trying to innovate BMX racing or, like if you're a snowboarder and you're trying to innovate, do you think that they only go into stuff like, oh, if I hit the jump at, 30 miles an hour, then I succeeded at what I was doing? No, they're like, the goal is to, like do these number of flips. And to get there, they fail significantly many, many times. Like, and we don't allow ourselves the opportunity to do that. Like, we don't create the space for it. We don't create the safety for it. We define success by the steps that we were going to take. And then we limit ourselves to steps that, felt safe to us before. That's not how you, it's not how you improve anything. Yeah. So the other thing I want to add is that with failure, one thing that has occurred to me is as I've gotten better at creating opportunities for myself to fail by
Mm.
experimenting in a lot of ways, it's I've become more aware of this that we have a really romanticized vision of what failure is like, and it sounds really happy and safe. Actual failure that you opened yourself up to and your team up to, and then you faced and went through as a team is tough. It's
Yeah.
painful. And that's why I like one of the reasons why, like for facilitated practices, I recommend retrospectives as like this entry level facilitated practice that basically anybody can do regardless of having trained in whatever. And it's just the act of, like weekly, I've been on teams that did this weekly, where at the end of a Friday, as a way of like kind of decompressing and kind of processing what happened that week, we would all get
Yeah.
together, usually in a comfortable room, and we would have a period of silence with the whole team. I also wrote a whole LinkedIn article on silence this last week. It is like 5-10 minutes of silence where you're just writing down what
Mm.
happened this week, like what went well, things that I want to celebrate that happened this week, what went badly, things that like really bummed me out that I want to get off my chest, and then what do I not know how to feel about but I want to kind of voice it. So it's kind of like a rosebud thorn thing. It's,
Yeah.
the good, the bad, and then the whatever. And then after that period of silence where everybody's writing down like what happened, you go and you put them up on a board or on a wall, and then people can like +1. They like put a
Mm.
dot on your
Okay.
sticky note.
Yeah.
It's still silent, and it's like a validation, right, for feeling that way. And then there's a period of we would do like an hour of this on every Friday, and it would be like and it was really palpable, that create this safe space for us to actually talk about the things we wanted to say. I was super happy that this happened this week, and I want to say, let's go us. Or this thing really sucked that happened, and I still am really bummed about it. And then other people could voice response, or +1 it, or even go, yeah, but on the other hand, so you end up processing things as a team, like good things and bad things. And then there's usually also in the course of that conversation, you end up with action items, which is really useful. You're like, oh, what does that mean we should do? Um, and it's like this really easy facilitated practice that also gets you as a team really, really good at processing and navigating failure, because failure is one of the categories. And I think you work it like a muscle. It's like, you know, what's her name? Amy Edmondson wrote The Fearless Organization, and it's like one of the best books on psychological safety. It's a great resource for why psychological safety is like hugely important for any organization. She refers to like NASA and the Challenger disaster
Mm,
and all of that stuff. Like being you could directly causally tie horrible things happening to lack of psychological safety within an organization's culture. Um, yeah, so like I'm always like that, navigating failure and working that safety as a muscle and all of that. So that's why I recommend retrospectives.
yeah, that's awesome. No, it's funny you bring up the NASA thing because that was definitely in one of the textbooks that I had from my last class talking about organizational culture. And yeah, they nailed it on the head. Like part of the failure was it was the overall culture of NASA at the time and the overconfidence in their own system
Yeah,
to be able to achieve what they said they were going to, you know. And
yeah,
I just think that's kind of neat. You
absolutely.
you brought it up earlier, Daniel. I think we'll transition here a little bit because we've kind of been on a little bit of topic of, and I'm going to say the buzzword for everybody out there, safe spaces, but
Yeah,
it's important. And you said you didn't have a space to one express yourself, and so you created a community to be able to do that. Let's talk about that. How you came up with it, and what really drove you to create this space so that you could bring questions and problems to a situation that you might not have been able to anywhere else.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, when you talk about safety, I think one of the things that really always like has safety on my mind is like I'm a writer, and like that's how I process things. I've always kind of written essays and stuff, and then I started doing it sort of strategically to try and change hearts and minds or make people aware of our situation when I was trying to battle policy
Mm.
and stuff like that. Um, and I've always been really very aware of how safe I felt doing that, just like even just like telling my own story. And I always thought that was really weird, that yeah, especially coming from Intel, right? They're like
Yeah.
OPSEC. It turns out,
Yeah.
so you're not going to fix a culture in which you're telling people it's not safe to share your experience. Like, but a lot of people
Yeah.
don't feel safe sharing their experience for a lot of reasons. There's the promotion thing, but there's also just like they just, even I was like trying to write essays on organizational culture, and I was like, I don't know if I should say this. People might,
Mm.
like this might upset people or something. And then I thought, like, why am I even thinking? Like, I'm nobody. Why would they even care if
Yeah.
some staff sergeant is writing an essay? They should be encouraging this. And so it would always struck me as like weird that I didn't feel safe. Like there was this constant, so that
Yeah.
as a writer, like that's always been really interesting to me. And I'm very out loud on LinkedIn these days. And it's, I think that the Air Force is doing a good job moving the other direction. We've got like Quarantine University, and we've got places for people to actually just like speak their truth. So I'd say that um, I think that the moderators of those spaces are kind of doing a good job of, depending on the space. There's different spaces do a better or worse job. Some places actively, there are certain Facebook groups that it seems like they're actively curating a toxic environment. I don't go
Yeah.
there because I've,
Yeah. There's a couple that they definitely poke.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And I'm like, I rarely share things on the Air Force subreddit, for example. I'm like, they're just too the culture there is a specific thing. If
Yeah.
occasionally, if I'm like feeling like I can handle a little bit of abuse, I'll go on there and I'll share something. I'm like,
Right.
yeah, I'll do just once or twice a year. Um, yeah. Uh, so I was on a team that did this, the retrospectives, and we were like very safe. And you go out and you fail utterly at what you're trying to do to, create a culture of innovation across the wing. And then you go back to your team and you talk about it and you kind of process it together. I always felt like I could just keep doing this. Like I could go out, suffer, strive, and struggle so long as I had that team to get like there. That's how I
Yeah.
got refreshed, right? That kind of filled my cup. And then I went to Hawaii after that, to my next assignment, and I just didn't have team there.
Yeah.
I kept trying to I think I don't know. I think some people find me annoying, especially when I'm like very outspoken. I'm also not socially great, so I'm constantly wondering if I'm like just bugging people with my, oh, you got to listen to me talk about facilitation for an hour, right? I can be a little, I don't, you might call it autistic. About, I want to talk about my favorite thing for hours on end, and you know I try and be more mindful of that. But for whatever reason, like I don't blame anybody there, I'd never really found a spot or a team where we were actively like refreshing and
Mm.
aligned to the same, we're pushing the same thing. Um and as a result, I kind of just felt alone, and I would go home and I'd try and process my, like, the struggles I was having. It didn't help also that I was having some stress with my daughter being on the decline. She ended up passing away halfway through that assignment. And um, so I was really I felt the lack of that team when I was there. Um, what I really wanted to do, I just wanted to convince people to let me facilitate. Like I wanted to help them with problems, and I couldn't get anybody to really give me their time. They just weren't willing. So as a result, I was just hustling kind of this methods with very little like traction. And then when we did quarantine,
Yeah.
and after the death of my daughter, I was just at home, and I was like, um, I guess I had been thinking about this idea of a community of practice for facilitation for some time. Um, because I was like, well, if I don't have a team within the institution, what if I just create a team completely outside of it? I'd been a part of the Defense Entrepreneurs Forum. It was a very cool nonprofit organization that I had kind of relaunched their Agora in Hawaii when I was there, and we had done some events. And so I had on my mind just this sense that if I need a community, I can kind of just make one. And so I did that for facilitation and design and sense making, and that's Agitare. And the way it started was I created a Google site, and I added a form. Right, you can just embed a form. I like to prototype things on Google Sites. It's like a habit of mine. And I was like, here's what Agitare is. It's a community of practice for facilitation. We're just growing together in these methods. And I created a site, shared it on LinkedIn, and I had 50 people sign up immediately to join the community. And I was like, oh, well, I guess it is a thing now. So
Yeah.
we just
Better get to
started
work.
meeting. Yeah. And so it's like we just start meeting regularly. It's now largely on Slack. We have a Slack group where the whole point is just to share training or resources, or things that we're aware of, and also talk about theory and facilitated sessions that we've done recently or we have coming up, to kind of reach out to the community and be like, hey, who wants to help plan this workshop that we've got coming up? It's a very collaborative kind of environment, and we're constantly just spinning off projects. One of the recent ones was the Overcoming Bureaucracy
Mm.
event, where somebody just on Quarantine University was like, what kinds of things overcome bureaucracy. And I was
Yeah.
like, that sounds like a good topic for an event. And then we designed the event and we facilitated it and we used Agitare resources to kind of guide it. I was just working on the video edit for that today. I'm a little late, but um, yeah, it's kind of we've got I think around 300 members in the Slack now who are just actively consuming what the core really engaged group is
Mm.
discussing and exploring. But we also do regular kind of get-togethers. We've got a pretty big backlog of speakers on our YouTube who have come in and talked about Lego Serious Play, these like speculative design exercises. We've had the folks from the Joint Special Operations University talk about creativity and creative
Mm.
problem solving. Yeah, we've got a pretty decent backlog of events on YouTube, and we're on LinkedIn as well. But it's like it weirdly overlaps with a lot of my work at Cyberworks, which makes
Yeah.
sense because I was hired at Cyberworks because of what I was doing with
Okay.
Agitare. The director saw, he is like, you're doing this like community like on the side. Do you want to just do that as your day job? So now I just am constantly feeding things from Agitare into Cyberworks and things from Cyberworks into Agitare. So it's kind of a perfect fit for me. And it also creates that there's this thing that actually Austin Wiggins and I have been going back and forth on, which is the ability to be a amateur on
Mm.
topics. It's actually really
Yeah.
difficult in places like LinkedIn, because people on LinkedIn are trying to sell themselves, right? Why would
Yeah.
you go on LinkedIn and be like, here's my, you know, here's my harebrained version of this. Like I completely misunderstood all the concepts and I misapplied them. Look at what I did. And then like I've kind of curated my LinkedIn to be pretty safe. Like the just yesterday I posted half an essay. I was like, I've been writing this essay and here's as much as I can fit in one post. Just
Right.
here. I
That's funny.
because I'm in the habit of just sharing things and seeing how people react to them, regardless of whether they're finished or not. Like if people would judge me for not being complete enough or not being accurate enough, I don't want to be affiliated with those kinds of people anyways. So but what a community does is it creates that, you said it's like the safe space thing. It
Yeah.
creates an environment in which being an amateur is kind of the point. And
Yeah.
so, it's not about um, showcasing your expertise. You're not trying to protect your reputation against the other people, which you do in most environments. You have to worry about, oh,
Yeah.
are people going to not want to call on me if I say something that sounds like a bunch of nonsense? Within the ideal, community, as far as I'm concerned, that's like a growth or learning community. The biggest, you know, measure of success for me is, are people in there actually being vulnerable and being like, here, one of the reasons we have the sessions channel is an opportunity to really do that thing that I had with my team back at Fort Meade when I had a team where we were reflecting together, is a place where you're actually safe going, I totally screwed this up and it went horribly and I
Right.
need help processing that. Like anybody who's trying to grow in anything needs that a place to actually be, not just hide their failures, but actually process them with a group of other people. It's really powerful. Like it fills me with energy. It's a wonderful thing to have.
Yeah. No, that's yeah, totally spot on. I'm big into sportsing, and the University of Minnesota football coach PJ Fleck he constantly says, to the to the criticism of fans sometimes that failure is growth.
Yeah.
And throughout throughout the Air Force, a lot of people are leading young people, and young people tend to do some dumb things. They're just
Yeah.
going to, but you have to be able to figure it out. And I know we've been saying safe space, but it's not safe space. And whereas in, like you had mentioned, when you fail, it does hurt. And the safe space is
Hmm.
not to protect you from the failure. It's
Yeah.
to allow you to be open. And you said vulnerable, which is super important, to be open about the failure so that you have an opportunity to grow. Because
Yeah.
one of the complaints that you hear from you know mid-level supervisors is as soon as an airman hits adversity, they quit. Well, if we
Hmm.
don't create spaces that allow them to grow past that failure, they're going to quit.
Yeah. Or if you create some kind of mechanism that is just like our promotion system, if you fail on an EPR, like you're
Yeah, you.
screwed for at least 5 years. Like
Yeah,
there's no r- r- pick yourself back up and you'll get it next time. There's a prolonged period of punishment for being exposed or being vulnerable, like or have like I've said a number of times I'd rather have people on my team who have experienced significant failures than have people on my team who have experienced nothing but success. Because the people who have experienced nothing but success are one, definitely lying to themselves and other people, and two, they haven't had the opportunity to step into things that might fail. And if you haven't experienced failure, you haven't developed those calluses that are like, all right, I'm going to roll up my sleeves and this is probably going to hurt because I'm probably going to land on my head, but this is what it's going to take. And then you land on your head and then you try again and you land on your head. People who have experienced nothing but success are way less prone to put themselves in opportunities to fail because failure hurts more for them. Which is, that like building up calluses and building muscles. Like people who have had, if you've failed consistently for 15 years and you're still at it, come join me, be on my team because you're
yeah,
probably pretty badass if you're still standing, right? Um, yeah, and the other thing about I think a lot of people misunderstand psychological safety, and I'm glad you brought that up, or safe spaces.
right,
Psychological safety isn't about being protected from negative information.
right.
Actually, psychologically safe environments and safe, like the safe spaces that you want, give people what they need to actually be exposed to negative information. When you don't create safety, the negative information doesn't show up.
Yeah.
And that's what you need. So people who are like, oh yeah, I tell it like it is. And, I like, no, that's not like, if you're making it unsafe for people to come to you because you're an asshole in response,
Yeah.
they're not going to keep coming to you. Like you're going to think it reminds me a little bit about reminds me a little bit of this thing from Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, where he talks about regression to the mean. He's like, it was Israeli, I think it was fighter pilots. It was something where every time they would fail at some kind of maneuver or something in exercises,
Mm.
they would get screamed at by instructors. And Kahneman, knowing that like that's not actually like positive reinforcement teaches people much better than screaming at them when they fail and screaming at
Yep.
them when they fail. It turns out if you like study learning at all, it doesn't actually it doesn't produce better learning when you just punish people for failures. And they were like, yeah, but every time they fail and I scream, then they do it right the next time. And he was like, so there's this thing called regression to the mean, which
Mhm.
is if anything happens outside of the average, the next time it's likely to fix. Like, regardless of what
Yeah.
you did, you could bonk them on the head with a balloon, and then it would look like the balloon had magically fixed them. That's just regression to the mean. So and I think we have that mindset a lot. It's like, oh, when people screw up, you have to punish them.
Right.
No, like try and prevent the failure from happening in the future. But chances are, if you're talking about a scenario in which failure is outside of the average, then the time after they fail, they'll probably succeed, just statistically speaking.
Yeah. Yeah. I always, when going through with airmen on, failure in any area, my usual response to them is it's not about your failure. It's your response to the
Yeah.
failure. Um, I mean, how, like we talked about a little bit before, how often do you see a person fail and then they're hit with so much negativeness because of what it could be it a PT test or an EOC on upgrade training, or, they made some dumb mistake and they got an Article 15 and now it's over them and they're on some control roster. So many times you see without positive reinforcement, they'll make the next negative response instead
Yeah.
of the continued positive responses.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that we're really good at creating downward spirals. Like I've seen it happen in just a tragic number of times where somebody hits a rough patch. Usually there's there's some kind of mental health crisis, or there's
Yeah.
and failure can trigger a mental health crisis. That's something to bear in mind. Like just a significant failure followed by punishment, followed by getting screamed at by the first sergeant or whatever it is. And then I've seen this put people in a state then where they're more likely to make bad choices, or they're more
Yeah.
likely to fall into that downward spiral. And I think the best leaders, and that's a difficult thing to interrupt, in part because I think we're really attached to the idea of leadership as being like some part of it is like about justice, almost like we're supposed to punish people. it,
Yeah.
it's not rehabilitative. It's not setting people up to prevent that failure from happening in the future. It's like, oh, if you didn't meet the criteria, now I get to punish you. And I say get
Right.
to, like, because I think some people revel in that aspect,
Yeah.
which is an unfortunate, when I talk about toxic leader, that's an unfortunate, like being in power is intoxicating,
Right.
you know? And nothing illustrates that quite like the transition from senior airman to staff sergeant. It is
Yeah.
weirdly, it's an exhilarating experience to no longer be oppressed and suddenly be in a position of, I don't want to say they're oppressors, but some of them
Uh,
kind of
it,
wield
it
the
can
stick
turn
in
into
that
that.
manner.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's because it takes significant character to kind of get past the intoxicating aspects of control, um, especially in a system kind of perpetuates this. Well, I had to suffer. Now it's and so I earned my right to make other people suffer. I think that's an unfortunate thread that continues.
Yeah.
Not in. I think that we're trying as through PME and all of that. I see indications that we're focusing more on the character aspects and the transformative leadership aspects, and I think that's really important because it's human instincts aren't always the best.
No, they're not. And uh, what I go back to when it's, leadership's always about human behavior and how you influence human behavior. Um, and of course, like you said, you can do that negatively, and then you
Yeah,
can do it positively. But my term of leadership is influencing a group of people for a positive result.
yeah.
You know,
Yeah, it really I talk about the types of people who are likely to stay in. I do think that I've always felt like I was having uh a paradoxical reaction to what they had intended when I would, when people would really clamp down on me and I felt like I was experiencing kind of an injustice because my life conditions or whatever. It didn't make me more likely to listen to those people. It did make me it did make
yeah,
me more
yeah,
likely to hide things from those people, for
yes,
example, or get away with things or, surreptitiously sabotage them. Like that.
Yeah.
But I think that, I talked about ordered versus complex systems, and the Cynefin thing. This is why I think leadership is a complex domain. There's no such thing as best practices for people. Something that works for you might put me in a bad state, right? Um, which means that you actually have to identify how a person has to be handled and dealt with, or how they have
Yeah.
to be grown. If you want to bring them more in line with the structural thing, that takes some finessing,
Yeah.
right? But the people who kept me in, or the people who made me want to operate within, to color inside the lines, or operate within the bounds of the system, um, they did it through um, honest conversations within
Yeah.
which I felt heard. They didn't do
Yeah.
it by, hitting me with a stick. Um, you know, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that just goes back to, as we were talking about, everyone wants to feel valued. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of the whole point, as we talk about human behavior and influencing, as soon as a person doesn't feel valued, that's when they question themselves of, well, what do I have to bring to the table? And then if it's nothing to them, then it's nothing.
Yeah. Yeah,
And,
absolutely.
and that's how you lose them. Well, as we wrap up, Daniel, what what are your goals now that you're in this position? You've been in there for a little bit. Where do you see your position moving to? What types of things do you have in line that we can look forward to?
Yeah, I'm really excited. I just did a year at Cyberworks so far. I'm here for another couple of years probably. And I'm privileged with the opportunity, especially having been in this space for a couple of years, to
Yeah,
talk to, offices that are just standing up or have been in place for a while, to kind of uh provide my 2 cents about what our strategy should be with Air Force innovation. So I kind of feel like I'm in an ideal place for my level of understanding of these things, and I'm also getting that practice I needed as in facilitation and design at Cyberworks. So it's kind of like I feel like I'm finally hitting my stride in the Air Force after 16 years.
yeah,
Which is weird, but um, yeah, I think that what I'd like to see, I really want people to understand the power of just picking up facilitated practices within any environment. So that's kind of what Agitare is about.
yeah,
It's it's like within any context, if you have if you have one person take the role of looking at the operating system of that gathering, or the operating system of that community or of that unit, and how people are engaging with one another, there is so much, like, mostly we just don't think about it, like the
yeah.
operating system.
Right.
But within a gathering, like for example, we're doing a project with meeting design, which I'm really excited about. um, you can design things and facilitate them in a way that opens up opportunities. It doesn't have to be the best practices that were given to you, by um and so what I'm excited about is expanding that into even more domains, into how we run meetings, into how we run squadrons, into how we run flights. And I see the app, there's like plenty of spots where we're just
Yeah.
not doing that. And that's what I'd hope to do, even, while we're doing Cyberworks projects and education efforts, and the Agitare community, is to kind of provide that. Whoever wants to show up and just try stuff or just talk about these practices, that's kind of how our democratizing function there. So yeah, I don't know if I answered your question.
No, I think you did. Um, yeah, this has been great, and I just want to say thanks again for taking the time to be on here today.
Yeah, thanks so much for inviting me. I'm really, as you can tell, I'm always happy to rant on these topics. So
Yeah, that was fun.
thanks.
Where can people reach you and Agitare?
So me, I'm on LinkedIn mostly. That's my social media of choice. There's not a lot of Hulters there, so I'm pretty easy to find that way. I'm also on Global. I'm the only Hulter in the Air Force, which is convenient. Um, and then Agitare also has a LinkedIn. It's Agitare. And there's also agitare.org, through which you can join the Slack and see kind of there's some history there and background and some resources for entry level training and facilitated practices. So yeah, those are the main places, but feel free to just, if anybody has any questions, I'm pretty accessible, even if I'm hard to pin down for podcast appearances.
No, it was great, and I'll put all that stuff in the show notes too.
Sweet. All right.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Daniel. Yep.
Yeah, thanks.